Tonight, we step into the small, worn rooms of 1920s Korea, into the pocket of a young painter who has just been paid. Tonight's story is 17-1 and 50 Jeon, a short story written in 1923 by the Korean writer Na Do-hyang, told through a series of letters to a beloved teacher. It's a quiet story about a struggling artist, his young wife, a grieving friend, and a woman who asks for more than he can give, and about what he chooses to do with the little money he has left. Let the noise of today settle. Close your eyes and let this gentle, aching story carry you towards sleep. 1 and 50, a young painter's single tear. Dear Teacher C, I offer you a feeling that rises up in me now and then from somewhere deep in my young heart. Time is like a flowing stream, and all of us in this life are simply out boating upon it. Old or young, heavy-hearted or joyful, who among us is not out on this stream called time? Today, I, young A, writing this letter to you, have also set a small boat afloat on that stream, drifting towards some harbor I cannot see. Some have boarded a swift steamship. Some have raised tall sails and let the following wind carry them along. Others row a leaking little boat, rocking unsteadily from side to side. From some boats come the sounds of yawning and stretching. From others, the beat of a drum and a cheerful song. From others, the soft murmur of a tender conversation. From others, a woman's heartbroken weeping. But do you know what sound comes from the boat I'm riding in? Only a heavy silence, made of endless gloom, sorrow, disappointment, and regret, all tangled together. There are hundreds, thousands of boats sailing this same stream alongside mine. We can only look at one another and smile bitterly and weep together. Teacher, this boat of mine does move forward. Whether it covers a great distance in an hour or barely any at all, it moves, but surely it can never row backward. Time flows on, silent and without meaning, simply carrying us along by its own fixed rule. And yet, upon this meaningless stream of time, what mark should I leave behind? While the tide of old custom still tries to drive this little boat away, while the dark waves of circumstance rise to swallow me whole, I try to raise the anchor, try to row, but my arms are too weak to choose a direction, and I have no engine strong enough to carry me forward. And yet I will go on, with these weak and powerless arms, toward that unseen harbor. Let today's small mark give birth to tomorrow's, and tomorrow's give birth to the day after, until at last, when I reach that harbor, I will have left behind something sacred, something worth remembering. Today, for some reason, the weather has turned unusually gloomy. I tried to lighten my heavy heart, but I could not manage it. After breakfast, I lay on the damp floor until noon. My thoughts drifted back and forth, sometimes making me smile, sometimes making me want to weep. My young wife sat beside me with her sewing basket, covered in colorful paper, her eyes bright as stars, mending the strings of the coat I would wear that day. Every time I look at my wife, I feel a pang of pity. Thinking of the hardship a young wife like her must endure, my heart aches. Is she truly the wife of my ideals, sitting there beside me? No, she is not. Ours was not a marriage born of two loves meeting as equals. And yet our little child calls me Papa Papa and calls her Mama Mama. Every time I hear that sound, my mind clears without my meaning it to, and a warm tenderness fills my chest before I know it. When the child laughs, I laugh too, and then my wife laughs as well. Her laughing eyes always turn to look at my face. Today, too, warm sunlight streamed through the south-facing window. Our innocent child sat in a corner of the room, playing with a wooden ruler, his plump little legs stretched out, breathing softly through his nose in play. A heavy feeling had clouded my face, but watching my wife sew so quietly and gently, I felt my whole body grow strangely calm and heavy. My wife, thinking of something, said, "Dear, the weather's getting colder. When you get your salary, could you buy the baby a little hat?" I heard her, but pretended not to. In my mind I thought, I still need to buy painting supplies and some books too. The baby's hat can wait. And a small irritation rose in me at her words. It wasn't that her request was wrong or that I begrudged the money. It was simply that any mention of money stirred up all the frustration I'd been carrying, and it soured even a good mood. My wife had mentioned it several times, and finding my silence awkward, she said after a while, "Why don't you answer me?" I still said nothing. She said again, Is it really so hard to buy the baby one little hat? And without another word, she shook out the coat she'd finished mending and tossed it onto the leg I had stretched out. The child, playing with his ruler, heard the word hat and said, "A pretty hat?" "For me, Mama," grinning and running toward his mother. Seeing this, my wife's pouting face softened and she said, "See, look at that. Hat, hat is all he says now," and gently shook my chest with her hand as I lay there. I only said, "Ugh, so annoying," and pushed her hand away with my elbow, turning over again. My wife, knowing my nervous temperament, showed no anger at all, only smiled and said, pretending to be cross, "Fine then, get up and get dressed and go out. It's not good for you to just lie around all day." I sat up at once, glanced at her face, and said, "Ugh, how can a man lie down in peace with you nagging like that? Where's my coat?" Unable to hold back a smile. I went outside. Leaving behind that tender little quarrel with my young wife, stepping into the fresh air and blue sky, I found myself already missing that very moment. I decided that when I got my salary, I would buy the child a new hat. I arrived at the MW office. DH and WC were looking at each other, clearly troubled about something. A dark cloud of worry hung over that small room. I asked, "What's going on? What are you two worried about?" DH, the dark-faced one, said, "We were actually waiting for you. Word came that NC's wife has fallen ill. He's poor as it is. Imagine how worried he must be. We were thinking of going down to his place today and waiting for you." "What? NC's wife?" "Yes, that's terrible. When should we leave? Do we have the fare ready?" "I've already prepared it. Then let's go." NC lives in the countryside, in a quiet little village. His life is far from comfortable. He farms the land with his own hands. In the morning he goes to the rice paddies with a hoe over his shoulder. In the evening he comes home and by the flicker of an oil lamp reads small books and writes poetry. I have always envied NC's quiet life. Dear teacher, if tears exist at all in this world, then surely no one could keep from weeping in a moment like this. It was evening when we three arrived at NC's village. Walking the last stretch from the station, we shared, without speaking, the very same feeling in our hearts. The small stars far above seemed to twinkle down at us. The night was dark and the road rough, but at the end of whatever force was guiding us, there waited the paradise called friendship. But when we finally reached NC's house, in the darkness surrounding the edge of the thatched roof cottage, someone was pacing back and forth alone. We recognized him as NC. We simply said, "NC," and reached out our hands in greeting. NC, without a word, held out his own pale hands and said, "How did you all come all this way?" in a voice so weak and sorrowful that all three of us sensed at once that something was terribly wrong. NC said nothing more, only gripped each of our hands tightly in turn. And then he said, "My wife passed into the eternal country 30 minutes ago." Tears fell from NC's eyes, tears we had never once seen before. The three of us stood there and wept for a long while. Seeing the wife of our dear friend, our comrade, pass from this world, the sorrow of human life struck all of us anew. I have not written to you in some time. I stayed at NC's house for a full week. His wife's funeral was held 2 days after we arrived. Early autumn had turned the air cold and bleak. The leaves seemed to dance atop the funeral bier as though withering away. The pallbearer's mournful chant, long and slow, drifted over the mountain pass toward the public cemetery. Ah, NC's wife is gone forever. She passed through the village, over the mountain ridge, gone forever. But her image, forever alive in NC's memory, through how many long years will it make him weep? When I attended that funeral, I too felt as though I stood upon the very border between life and death. What difference is there truly between being alive and being dead? I could not help but feel an infinite sorrow. I came back from the countryside yesterday. Today the weather was clear. As the sweet, delicate air passed through my nose and into my lungs, my spirit, wilted since yesterday, seemed to clear once more. I painted, filling my chest with boundless hope. As I moved my palette and brush, I felt for that moment truly alive. I tasted the truth of living. But even in ease there is restlessness, and even that quiet joy has its moments of breaking. I stretched once, set down my palette, put on my coat and hat, and checked the clock. It was 2. To shake off my restlessness, I decided to go visit SOSO, is a woman deserving of great pity. She has only one leg. She is 20 years old. Dragging her missing leg behind her through heat and cold, she attended school for over 10 years. I became acquainted with her in my 4th year of middle school, meeting her at the same street corner each morning, and we have known each other for 3 years now. She has only an elderly mother. Their life together is truly difficult and hard. She earns their daily bread by sewing in a rented room in someone else's house. Today I visited her again. As I stepped through the gate, I coughed once or twice. But So, who always used to greet me warmly, was nowhere to be seen today. I coughed again and tried to open the door, but I could not. Through the gap in the door came the sound of a mother and daughter weeping, and it colored my heart with unease. After a moment the door opened, and So's elderly mother came out. Wiping her tears with the edge of her skirt, she looked at me and said, "You've come? Please, go on inside," turning away to blow her nose. I had nothing to ask, so I only said, "Is So home?" and glanced into the room. Inside, So sat with her back turned, as if she had been crying and could not bring herself to turn around, wiping her eyes with the end of her skirt string. Seeing me, she only lowered her head and said, "Please, come in," glancing up at me with reddened eyes before lowering them again. I stepped into the room. As I entered, my foot struck the wooden stick that served in place of So's missing leg, left resting at the edge of the floor. I felt a shudder run through me and stepped quickly into the room. So said, "Don't you have any free time today?" looking at me more intently than usual. I said, "I have some time around 4. I just came to see you for a moment," and took my seat. "Has something unpleasant happened at home?" I asked, trying to learn why she'd been crying, but she only said, "No, it's nothing," and fell silent, looking embarrassed. So sat quietly for a long while. Then in a trembling half voice she said, "Teacher," and called me, then fell silent again. After another pause, she said once more, "Teacher." I said, "Yes," and looked only at her bowed head. "I am a cripple," she said, and the tears she had held back until then fell once more, rolling onto the floor. Hearing this, I too wanted to weep alongside her. I am a cripple, but even a cripple like me has blood, has feelings. I have hot tears and a heart that burns red. But there is no one to understand these tears, no one to receive this heart," she said, sobbing. "Do you pity me, Mr. A? If you truly pity me, then please, understand this heart of mine as well," she said, pleading, and collapsed against my knee, weeping. Teacher, who could hear such words and not weep? Who could fail to feel pity? I only held So and wept alongside her for a long while. "So, please don't cry. I do pity you. I truly sympathize with you." "Then, will you love this one-legged cripple forever?" Hearing this, I could only say, "What?" and find myself unable to say anything more. What rose before my eyes was my own young wife, the child playing with his wooden ruler. "Ah, teacher, I truly do pity this So. I truly do sympathize with her. But teacher, was it not, in the very moment that pity arose in me, already something other than love? This woman tried to love me, but as I received that love, my heart only ached all the more. Even receiving such a sincere love, I could not help but turn it away. I could only say, "So, please don't cry. My heart feels as though it is melting from your tears." "Mr. A, I truly believe that you alone would love me sincerely." I could only say, "That's enough now. Come, sit up," and wipe away my own tears. "Yes, I understand, but I cannot give you an answer to what you've asked so quickly." "Then when will you give me your answer?" "That I will answer slowly, in time." So looked at me with suspicion. "Then you mean to say you will never truly love me," she said, looking at me with resentment. I did not know how to answer. "I understand now," she said, and in her eyes, tangled with resignation and resentment, the foolish tears had already dried, leaving only something bitter behind. I said, "So, I will never forget you, as long as I live." She said, "Yes, please don't forget me. Until I close my eyes, I don't think I'll be able to forget you either," was all she said. Leaving So's house, I headed toward the school. Today was the last day of the month, payday. Stepping into the office, all I could think of was what I would buy with that money. A hat for the child, a scarf for my wife. While checking homework in class, there was a student among those who hadn't done theirs, the youngest one, dressed in threadbare clothes. When I asked, "Why didn't you draw your homework?" the child said nothing for a long while, then began to weep, hot tears falling. Seeing his worn-through socks, I felt a pang of pity and said, "Why won't you answer, instead of just crying? and placed a hand on his shoulder. The child wept harder and said, "At home they said there's no money, so they wouldn't buy me drawing paper." "Teacher, do I have any right to punish this child?" I only said, "Listen, as long as your heart is sincere, that is enough. That one tear of yours is worth far more than the drawing you didn't turn in today." After class, I went to the office. The accountant called me over discreetly. "Mr. A, come here for a moment," and placed an envelope with my salary into my hand, saying, "Here's something for your tobacco money." I felt somehow ashamed to accept it. As the day grew dark, I stepped outside the school gates and finally took out the envelope to count what was inside. Inside was 17 won and 50 Jeon. 17 won and 50 Jeon. I stopped in my tracks. Why only 17 won and 50 Jeon? I wondered, puzzled, until I suddenly remembered my visit to NC's house. The week I had missed, going to comfort my friend who had lost his wife, had been deducted from my pay. Ah, teacher. In my hand was 17 won and 50 Jan. The reward for a full month's labor, 17 won and 50 Jan. Without quite realizing it, I found myself walking, money in hand, all the way to So's house. Through gaps in the clouds, the small stars seemed to peer down, mocking this foolish young man, A. At her gate I stopped, wondering why I had even come, and thought of turning back. But I could not simply walk in as easily as before. Just then, I heard the mother and daughter weeping again. Mixed into it came the words, "So, now we'll truly be ghosts wandering the streets." A voice so pitiful it seemed to freeze the blood in my veins. Only then did I understand the reason for their tears. This mother and daughter had no roof to call their own. Over some small unpaid rent, they were being thrown out of this very house today. Standing outside, listening, in my pocket was 17 won and 50 Jeon. In that instant, something urgent and burning rose up within my chest. I took out the envelope of money and in pencil wrote the letter A on the outside. I opened the door without a sound and quietly set it down on the edge of the floor. Then, like a thief, I hurried out on trembling legs. I did not look back and walked straight home. At home, my wife would be waiting for me. Our little child would be waiting for his father to come home with the promised pretty hat, his round hand propped under his chin. But on this payday, my pocket was already completely empty. There was nothing left to bring home to satisfy my wife's heart, nothing to keep the child's joy from turning to disappointment. And yet, walking home through the darkness, my heart, for some reason, was filled with satisfaction and a vivid living sense of purpose. I went again to the MW office. There, DH and WC sat looking at some book, and upon seeing me asked, "How did it go?" They meant my salary. I took off my hat, untied my shoes, and said with a bitter smile, "Ha! The reward for my month's labor, I spent it in a truly worthwhile way." And so a young painter walked home in the dark, his pockets completely empty, and somehow his heart was full. That's tonight's story. A small act, quietly done, with no one watching. If it left even a small warmth behind in you, we're glad you were here. Slow Night Ancient Tales will return tomorrow with another story from the past. If these stories help you rest, subscribing, liking, and turning on notifications means a great deal to us. Sleep well tonight. Good night.